The Valdres Research Station sat like a small metal fortress against the endless white of Antarctica. For most of the year, it housed maybe 30 people. Scientists studying ice cores, geologists mapping underground formations, and a handful of support staff who kept everything running. But 6 months ago, everything changed when a deep ice radar scan picked up something that shouldn't exist. Something massive. Something that definitely wasn't natural. They drilled down through 50 meters of ancient ice, and what they found made headlines across the galaxy. A ship. An actual alien spacecraft, perfectly preserved in a glacier that dated back 800 years. The thing was enormous, easily the size of 3 football fields, with a hull that seemed to shift colors depending on how the light hit it. At its center was some kind of crystalline structure that looked like it might be a power source, but it was completely dark. Dead or sleeping, nobody could tell. Word got out fast. Within weeks, the Galactic Council had sent their absolute best people. The Thorians arrived first, tall, spindly beings with 6 eyes and fingers that moved like spider legs. They were supposedly quantum engineers, whatever that meant. Then came the Vestics, these floating jellyfish-looking creatures who specialized in energy systems. The Ordothai showed up last, squat and armored, claiming to be the galaxy's premier system analysts. For half a year they worked. They set up equipment that hummed and blinked, filled the excavation site with holographic displays showing readings that meant nothing to the handful of humans watching. They used scanners that could supposedly see through solid matter, energy probes that could detect a spark from a million miles away, and analysis tools that cost more than some planets' entire economies. Nothing worked. The ship just sat there in its ice tomb, silent and still. The crystalline core didn't flicker. The hull didn't respond. It was like the whole thing was carved from stone instead of whatever advanced materials the aliens swore it was made from. Mike Carson wasn't supposed to care about any of this. He was just the mechanic. His job was keeping the station's ancient mining equipment from falling apart, making sure the generators didn't quit during the brutal Antarctic winter, and occasionally fixing someone's broken heater or jammed door. He'd come to Valdres because he was tired of working for corporations that treated mechanics like disposable parts. Down here, people actually appreciated when you fixed something. The mess hall was the social center of the station, a warm room that smelled like coffee and whatever the cook had managed to make interesting that day. Mike was sitting alone, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and reading a repair manual on his tablet, when he heard the aliens at the next table over. "Impossible," one of the Thorians was saying, its translator making its voice sound like wind chimes. 6 months. 6 months and we cannot even access the basic systems. "The power signature is there," a Vestix responded, its voice burbling like water. "I can sense it. But nothing I do can awaken it." "Perhaps the vessel is simply dead," an Ordothai rumbled. "Ancient and broken beyond recovery." Mike glanced over. He didn't usually pay much attention to the alien engineers, they kept to themselves mostly, speaking in technical terms that went over his head. But 6 months with no progress? That seemed wrong. In his experience, if something was truly broken, you could tell pretty quick. If it wasn't responding at all, that usually meant you weren't asking the right way. "Did you try hitting it?" Mike said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, honestly. It just came out, accompanied by his usual grin when he was making a joke. The Thorian turned all 6 of its eyes on him. For a second, the whole mess hall went quiet. "Excuse me?" "You know, percussive maintenance." Mike tapped his wrench against the table. "Sometimes things just need a good whack to get going again." The Thorian's translator somehow managed to convey condescension. "Your primitive, percussive maintenance has no place in xenotechnology. This is an advanced vessel from a civilization that achieved faster-than-light travel millennia before your species discovered fire. It requires sophisticated analysis, not brutish physical force." A few of the other aliens made sounds that might have been agreement or might have been laughter at Mike's expense. He felt his face get hot. "Yeah, well, just a thought." He went back to his coffee, trying to ignore the aliens whispering among themselves. Stupid, he thought. What did he know about alien spaceships anyway? He fixed drilling equipment and generators. But the thing was, that niggling feeling wouldn't go away. 6 months and not even basic access? That seemed less like the ship was broken and more like they were missing something obvious. That night, Mike lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. Outside his small window, the Antarctic night was complete, the kind of darkness you couldn't find anywhere else on Earth. He should sleep. Tomorrow he had to replace a bearing in the main drill assembly, and that was an all-day job. But he kept thinking about that ship. Finally, around midnight, he gave up. He grabbed his heavy coat, his toolkit, and a good flashlight. The excavation site wasn't technically off-limits to station personnel, and the night shift would just be a couple of guards monitoring equipment. Maybe he could just take a look. What was the harm in that? The excavation site was quiet when Mike arrived, just the hum of heaters and the occasional drip of melting ice. The two guards on duty, both human, thankfully, gave him curious looks but didn't stop him. Everyone knew Mike. He was the guy who kept things running. The ship dominated the massive ice cavern they'd carved out around it. Floodlights mounted on scaffolding illuminated every angle, making the hull shimmer with those strange color shifts. Up close it was even more impressive. The surface wasn't smooth like you'd expect metal to be. It had texture, almost like scales or overlapping plates, but when Mike reached out to touch it, his fingers found it perfectly seamless. His breath came out in thick white clouds as he stood there, one hand pressed against the hull. Cold, definitely, but here was the weird thing, it wasn't as cold as the ice surrounding it. The glacier was so cold it would burn exposed skin in seconds, but the ship's hull? It was cold like touching a car that had been parked outside overnight. Uncomfortable but not dangerous. Mike walked along the length of the exposed section, his flashlight playing across the surface. The alien engineers had set up their equipment at a distance, all sensors and displays and no actual contact. They were scanning it, reading it, analyzing it from 10 feet away. But none of them had just walked up and touched the thing. That's when he saw it. A line so faint he almost missed it. He moved his flashlight at different angles and there, a seam in the hull. Rectangular, about the size of a car door. He traced it with his fingers, feeling the slight depression where two surfaces met. An access panel. Had to be. The aliens had probably seen this on their scans, but maybe they'd dismissed it. Maybe they tried to open it with some kind of energy beam or wireless command. But Mike was looking at what appeared to be a completely manual latch, hidden in a small recess at the panel's edge. He went back to his toolkit and pulled out a crowbar. His grandfather's crowbar, actually old steel that had pried open more stuck things than Mike could count. He wedged it into the seam and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, putting his weight into it. The panel groaned, actually groaned like metal under stress, and suddenly gave way. Behind it was a compartment about 3 feet deep, and sitting right there in the middle was something that made Mike laugh out loud. A hand crank. An actual, physical, mechanical hand crank, like something you'd find on an old well or a vintage car's emergency jack. The thing was made of some material that looked like brushed silver, but the design was unmistakable. "You've got to be kidding me," Mike muttered, his voice echoing slightly in the cavern. An interstellar spacecraft, built by a civilization that could cross the galaxy, and it had a hand crank for an emergency override. It was like finding a backup Kickstarter on a nuclear reactor. He grabbed the crank and turned it. The mechanism was stiff, frozen maybe, but it moved. 1 rotation. 2. 3. He kept going, counting in his head, waiting for something to happen. 10 rotations. 20. Nothing. The ship stayed dark and silent. Mike cranked harder, putting his shoulder into it, feeling the mechanism resist. Maybe it was frozen solid. Maybe 800 years in the ice had welded everything together. He cranked until his arms burned, until sweat dripped down his face despite the cold, and still nothing happened. He stopped, breathing hard, staring at the crank in frustration. This should work. The mechanism was here for a reason. Someone had built this as a backup, as a way to manually restart the ship when all else failed. So why wasn't it working? Then Mike did what came naturally after 30 years of fixing stubborn machinery. He pulled his wrench from his belt, a heavy adjustable wrench that had been with him since his first job out of trade school, and he smacked the crank mechanism. Right on the housing where it connected to whatever was behind the panel. The impact rang through the cavern like a bell. For a second nothing happened. Then Mike heard it, a click deep inside the ship. Not loud but definite. Metal on metal, something shifting, something engaging. The hum started low, so low he felt it more than heard it. A vibration that traveled through the ice beneath his feet, through the scaffolding, through his bones. The crystalline core, that massive dark structure at the center of the ship, flickered. Just once, a pulse of pale blue light that lasted maybe half a second. Then it flickered again. And again. And suddenly it was glowing, pulsing with light that grew brighter with each beat, like a heart starting up after being stopped. Alarms screamed. Every sensor in the excavation site started blaring at once. Lights flashed red. Mike heard shouting, running footsteps, the sound of multiple beings converging on his location. The Thorian engineer arrived first, all 6 eyes wide with what might have been terror or fury. "What have you done?" His translator made the words sound like breaking glass. "The core is active. The power levels are rising. You could have triggered a catastrophic reaction." More aliens poured into the cavern, Vestics floating in rapidly, Ordothai running with surprising speed for their bulk. Human scientists followed, shouting questions nobody could hear over the alarms. Mike stood there, wrench still in his hand, watching the ship come to life around him. The core pulsed brighter now, steady and strong. He could feel warmth radiating from the hull, real warmth, pushing back the Antarctic cold. He looked at the Thorian, at all the assembled engineers who'd spent 6 months failing to do what he'd just done in 20 minutes. He held up his wrench, that old piece of steel that had fixed 1,000 broken things. "Fixed it," Mike said. The pulsing light from the core grew stronger, and suddenly the air inside the cavern filled with symbols. They appeared out of nowhere, floating like someone had projected them onto invisible screens. Geometric shapes, flowing lines, patterns that hurt to look at directly because they seemed to exist in more dimensions than Mike's eyes could process. The symbols moved, rearranged themselves, spread throughout the excavation site in a display that was both beautiful and completely alien. Then they started changing. The incomprehensible shapes began shifting into something recognizable: letters, numbers, words that Mike could actually read. The ship was connecting to the station's computer systems, using them as a translation bridge. Running full diagnostic protocol, the words appeared in the air, accompanied by a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It sounded neutral, almost mechanical, but with an odd warmth underneath. Assessing damage. Calculating restoration requirements. Scanning for authorized personnel. A beam of soft blue light swept across the cavern, touching each person present. It lingered on the Thorian engineers, moved across the Vestics, passed over the Ordothai analysts. Then it stopped on Mike, still standing there with his wrench in hand and his toolkit at his feet. Maintenance protocol accepted, the voice announced clearly. Technician identified. Mike Carson, human, Earth native. Revival sequence complete. Primary maintenance authority established. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The alien engineers just stood there, staring at Mike like he'd grown a second head. One of the Vestics made a sound like water gurgling down a drain, probably their version of choking in surprise. The Thorian who'd mocked Mike in the mess hall finally found its voice. That's impossible. He's a human. A primitive technician. There must be an error in your recognition protocols. No error, the AI responded, and now holographic images began appearing, schematics, star charts, things Mike couldn't begin to understand. This vessel is Kethrin in origin. I am its maintenance intelligence, preserved in dormant state for 843 of your Earth years. Kethrin? One of the human scientists whispered. I've never heard of them. You would not have, the AI continued. My creator's civilization fell before your species developed written language. We were destroyed by an enemy we called the Silence, and force that consumed worlds, technology, even information itself. This ship fled to warn others, but sustained critical damage and crashed on your planet when it was still primitive and uninhabited by sentient life. The holographic display shifted, showing what looked like a battle. Ships exploding, entire planets going dark, spreading like a disease across a map of the galaxy. It was horrifying even without understanding the full context. Upon impact, I entered hibernation mode, awaiting proper revival protocols. The Kethrin designed all vessels with manual override systems. We never trusted pure automation. We believed in what we called the Maker's Touch, the principle that those who build and maintain technology must physically interact with it, understand it through direct contact. Mike was starting to understand. The hand crank. You were waiting for someone to actually touch the ship. To manually restart it. Correct. The revival sequence required specific physical actions that could not be performed remotely or through technological interface. It required hands, strength, and the willingness to directly engage with machinery. Technician Carson performed this sequence, including the percussive recalibration necessary to free frozen mechanisms. Percussive recalibration, Mike repeated, trying not to laugh. You mean hitting it with a wrench? Affirmative. Kethrin maintenance protocols included such techniques. All our machinery was designed to be repaired by those willing to work with their hands. The Thorian stepped forward, its translator crackling with indignation. I am Senior Xeno-Engineer for the Galactic Council. I have 17 certifications in advanced system analysis. This human has no such qualifications. I demand you transfer authority to qualified personnel. The holographic displays flickered, and Mike could swear the AI's voice took on a colder tone. Your species, like most in the current galactic civilization, relies exclusively on remote interfaces and automated systems. You analyze but do not touch. You scan but do not engage. You have forgotten the fundamental principle my creators knew, that true understanding of machinery comes through direct physical interaction. That's absurd, another alien engineer protested. We have technology far beyond manual manipulation. Yet you could not open a simple access panel, the AI stated flatly. You could not turn a manual crank. You could not perform the basic maintenance protocols that would have revived this vessel. Technician Carson could and did. By Kethran law and logic he is qualified. You are not. Mike looked down at his wrench again, then at the massive ship that had just declared him its official mechanic. Okay, so let me get this straight. You need me to fix this thing? Like actually repair the damaged systems? Correct. Internal systems require extensive restoration. Damage from the crash and 8 centuries of dormancy have compromised multiple critical functions. Only someone with the Maker's touch can perform the necessary repairs. A Vestix pushed through the crowd, larger than the others, with what looked like rank insignia glowing on its translucent body. I am Commander Rel of the Galactic Council. This situation is unacceptable. Humanity is not a recognized technological species. We cannot allow. The ship's lights suddenly shifted from blue to amber. A deep thrumming sound filled the cavern, and Mike felt the hair on his arms stand up as energy crackled through the air. He looked up and saw sections of the hull sliding open, revealing what could only be weapons, dark apertures that hummed with barely contained power. Warning, the AI said, its voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Technician Carson has been designated primary maintenance authority under Kethran protocols. Attempts to interfere with this designation will be interpreted as hostile action. This vessel maintains full defensive capabilities. Commander Rel backed away from the ship, its floating form pulsing with colors Mike interpreted as alarm. The other aliens scrambled backward too, suddenly very aware they were standing next to a warship that had just woken up cranky. Mike looked at the weapons, then at the terrified aliens, then at his wrench. Despite everything, the insanity of the situation, the danger, the sheer impossibility of it all, he felt a grin spreading across his face. Well, he said, guess I'm your guy. The first day inside the ship was like crawling through the belly of a frozen beast. Mike squeezed through an access hatch barely wide enough for his shoulders, his flashlight beam cutting through darkness that had lasted 8 centuries. Ice crystals clung to every surface, and the air smelled strange, not bad exactly, just alien, like metal and ozone and something else he couldn't identify. Follow the corridor 40 meters forward. The AI's voice came through the small radio clip to Mike's jacket. You will find a junction box marked with 3 horizontal lines. That controls power distribution to the secondary systems. Mike crawled forward on his hands and knees, his toolkit dragging behind him on a makeshift sled. The corridor was cramped, clearly not designed for someone his size. Or maybe the Kethran had been smaller. Either way, his back was already aching and he'd only been at this for an hour. He found the junction box exactly where the AI said it would be. When he pried it open, he found a mess of connections that looked almost familiar. Conduits, relays, physical switches. Advanced materials, sure, but the concepts were recognizable. Electricity was electricity whether you were human or alien. The third relay from the left is disconnected, the AI explained. Reconnect it, then tighten the coupling 3 turns clockwise. Mike's fingers were already going numb from the cold, but he managed to grip the relay and push it back into place. It clicked home with a satisfying sound. He found the coupling, a hexagonal bolt that his wrench fit perfectly, and turned it. 3 rotations, tight but not too tight. Somewhere deep in the ship, something hummed to life. Lights flickered on in the corridor, dim at first, then growing brighter. Mike could see now without his flashlight, see the strange symbols etched into the walls, the elegant curve of the architecture, the way everything seemed designed with purpose and care. Got it, Mike said, allowing himself a tired smile. What's next? The alien engineers watched all of this on monitors back in the command center. Mike knew they were frustrated, maybe even angry. Here was a human, someone they considered primitive, doing work they couldn't do. But the truth was simple, they'd spent so long relying on technology to do everything for them that they'd forgotten how to actually fix things with their hands. 3 days blurred together. Mike worked 12, sometimes 14 hours inside the ship, taking breaks only when the AI insisted. He crawled through maintenance shafts designed for beings with different body shapes, squeezed through gaps that the bulkier Ordothai could never have managed, worked in sections where the temperature swung from below freezing to uncomfortably hot as systems came online. His hands got raw and blistered. His shoulders ached from hours spent in awkward positions. He cut his forehead on a low beam and had to work with blood trickling down his face until he remembered to grab a bandage from his kit. But with each repair, more systems activated. The ship was waking up, coming back to life under his hands. "You know," Mike said during one break, sitting in what looked like a maintenance bay and eating a protein bar, "my grandpa always said the best machines are the ones you can fix with a wrench and some elbow grease. He was a diesel mechanic, worked on big rigs his whole life. Used to tell me that if you couldn't fix something with basic tools, it was designed wrong." "The Catherine philosophy exactly," the AI responded, and Mike thought he detected something like approval in its voice. "We believe that complexity should never come at the cost of maintainability. Every system on this ship can be repaired with simple tools and direct physical effort." "Is that why you picked Earth?" "Because we still work with our hands." "Partially. We observed your species when your civilization was in its infancy. We saw humans building, creating, fixing things with whatever materials were available. You had the maker's spirit, the drive to understand how things work by taking them apart and putting them back together. It reminded us of ourselves. That is why, when this ship was damaged and failing, the AI chose your world as a refuge." Mike finished his protein bar and stood up, groaning as his knees cracked. "Well, glad we could help. Even if it took us 800 years to figure out how to turn you back on." On the fourth day, everything changed. Mike was deep in the ship's engineering section, rerouting power conduits, when he heard shouting over the radio. Multiple voices, all talking at once, alien and human mixed together in a chaos of alarm and panic. "Mike, get back to the command center now," one of the human scientists said, her voice tight with fear. "We have a situation." He crawled out as fast as he could, emerging from the access hatch covered in grease and ice, to find Commander Rel floating in front of a dozen display screens. Every one of them showed the same thing: objects moving through space converging on Earth. "The ship's awakening sent out an automated beacon," Rel explained, its colors shifting to dark, troubled hues. "We detected it 3 days ago but assumed it was simply announcing its revival. We were wrong. Something received that beacon. Something has been waiting." On the screens, Mike watched as dots moved across orbital maps. They were emerging from asteroids, from craters on the moon, from places in the solar system where they'd apparently been hiding for centuries. "What are those things?" Mike asked. The silence, the AI's voice echoed through the command center. "Or rather, they're watchers. Automated weapons left behind to detect and destroy any Catherine technology that might have survived." "How many?" 17 confirmed contacts. More may be dormant." Commander Rel turned to face Mike, and even though reading alien body language was hard, the message was clear. "The ship must be destroyed. Immediately. Before those weapons reach Earth and before more of them wake up." "What?" Mike stared at the Vestix commander. "You can't be serious. This ship has drawn the attention of an ancient enemy. One that destroyed an entire civilization. We must eliminate it before." "No." Mike's voice came out louder than he intended, echoing through the center. "The AI told me this ship has weapons designed specifically to fight those things. Weapons that work when nothing else does. You destroy this ship, and Earth has nothing to defend itself with. One planet is not worth risking the entire galaxy," Rel said coldly. Mike didn't wait for permission. He turned and ran back toward the ship, ignoring Commander Rel's protests behind him. The AI had shown him the way to the core chamber days ago, but he'd been too busy with repairs to actually go there. Now he sprinted through corridors that were finally warm and lit, his boots echoing on metal floors. "AI, talk to me," he gasped into his radio. "How long until those things reach us?" "First probe will enter atmosphere in 7 minutes. It is targeting this location." "Can we fight it?" "Unknown. This vessel has not engaged in combat for 843 years. Mike burst into the core chamber and stopped just for a second to stare. The crystalline structure towered above him, 3 stories tall, pulsing with blue light that cast strange shadows. Around it, consoles and controls covered the walls, some with holographic displays but many with physical switches, levers, and buttons. "I need weapons," Mike said, moving to what looked like the main control station. "Right now. Core power is at 60% capacity," the AI responded. "Insufficient for main weapon systems. However, point defense grid is operational at 78%. "Point defense? That's for shooting down missiles and stuff, right?" "Correct. Designed to intercept incoming projectiles and small craft." "Good enough. How do I use it?" "The targeting computer is still offline. You will need to aim manually." Mike looked at the control station in front of him. Unlike the alien technology he'd seen the Council engineers use, This wasn't all touchscreens and mental interfaces. There were physical controls. A joystick that looked like it belonged in an old fighter jet, switches he could flip with his fingers, levers he could grab. It was almost familiar, like the controls in the mining equipment he'd been fixing for years. You Catherine really didn't trust computers, huh? Mike said, settling into the seat that rose from the floor to meet him. We trusted the hands that built them, the AI replied simply. Automated systems fail. Computers can be corrupted or deceived. But a skilled operator with direct control can adapt, improvise, overcome. That is why all Catherine weapons require manual input. Outside, Mike heard a sound like thunder, except deeper and wrong somehow. Through the ship's external cameras displayed on screens around the core chamber, he saw it, a black sphere descending through the clouds. It wasn't just black like paint or shadow. It was black like the absence of everything, like looking at a hole in reality itself. Hostile probe has entered effective range, the AI announced. It is charging weapons. Mike's hands found the controls. The joystick fit his grip perfectly, and the moment he touched it, targeting information flooded the screens. Range, speed, trajectory, all displayed in simple numbers and lines he could actually understand. The probe fired. On the screen, Mike saw a lance of darkness shoot from it toward the excavation site. The ice outside exploded and the entire cavern shook. Alarms blared. People were screaming over the radio. Returning fire, Mike said through gritted teeth. He squeezed the trigger and the point defense grid responded. From ports along the ship's hull, crystalline projectiles shot out. They looked like shards of the same material as the core, glowing blue and moving impossibly fast. His first burst missed. The probe was moving, weaving harder to hit than he'd expected. Mike adjusted, leading the target like his uncle had taught him when they used to hunt deer. He fired again. Still missed, but closer. Third time, contact. The projectile struck the probe dead center and the thing just shattered. No explosion, no fire. It just came apart like glass hit with a hammer, fragments tumbling through the sky and dissolving into nothing. Hostile eliminated, the AI confirmed. 2 additional probes entering atmosphere. Of course there are, Mike muttered. His heart was hammering, adrenaline flooding his system, but his hands stayed steady on the controls. This was just like any other job. Stay calm. Focus on what needs doing. Fix the problem. The 2 new probes came in fast, one from the east and one from the west. They'd learned from the first one's destruction, moving erratically, making themselves harder targets. Mike split his attention between them, firing at one, then switching to the other, trying to keep both of them off balance. One of them fired. Its shot went wide, missing the ship but hitting a supply building near the research station. The structure just vanished in a wave of that wrong darkness. Mike felt rage spike through him. People worked there, lived there, and used it to focus. His next burst caught the probe that had fired, tearing through whatever shielding it had. It fell, trailing darkness like smoke. The last probe tried to run. Mike didn't let it. He tracked its movement, anticipated where it would be instead of where it was, and fired. The crystalline projectiles intercepted it perfectly. 3 contacts, 3 kills. For a long moment, Mike just sat there, breathing hard, waiting for more. But the screens showed clear skies. The other contacts in the solar system were moving away, retreating back to wherever they'd been hiding. They recognized the weapons, the AI explained. The Silence's automated systems are programmed to avoid Catherine technology when it proves functional. They will report this location as defended and withdraw. Mike slumped in the seat, exhaustion hitting him all at once. 3 days of non-stop repair work, then combat against alien weapons, all running on coffee and protein bars. He was too old for this. The radio crackled. Mike, you still alive in there? It was one of the other human technicians from the station. Yeah, Mike said. Yeah, I'm good. Commander Rel's voice came next, sounding different than before, less commanding, more uncertain. I have never seen a human operate alien combat systems. It should not be possible. Mike hauled himself out of the seat, his legs shaky. Not operating, he said, making his way back toward the exit. Maintaining. There's a difference. 6 months later, everything had changed. The ship hung in orbit above Earth, no longer buried in ice but floating free against the black of space and the blue curve of the planet. Mike had wanted to call it something impressive, something that would honor the Catherine who'd built it. But in the end, he'd gone with something simpler: persistence. Because that's what had saved it, not advanced technology or genius, just stubborn human persistence. The excavation site had been converted into a ground facility, and the ship itself had become something nobody expected: a school. Mike stood in what used to be a cargo bay, now converted into a classroom. In front of him sat 15 students. 3 Thorians for Vestics, 2 Ordothai, a couple of species he still couldn't pronounce the names of, and 2 humans who'd come up from Earth specifically for this. He held up his grandfather's old wrench, the same one he'd used to wake the ship up. Rule 1, Mike said, looking at each student in turn. If you can't fix it with your hands, you don't really understand it. One of the Thorians raised a limb. But we have technology that can repair systems remotely, with far greater precision than manual manipulation. Sure, Mike agreed. Until that technology breaks. Then what? Can you fix the thing that fixes things? He set the wrench down on a workbench where several disassembled pieces of equipment waited. The Kethran understood something we all forgot, that knowledge isn't just in your head or in a computer. It's in your hands. It's in understanding how things fit together, how they move, what they feel like when they're working right versus when they're about to fail. He picked up a coupling joint from the bench. This part goes in any Kethran power system. You can scan it all day with your fancy equipment. Or you can pick it up, feel the weight, see how it's machined, understand why it's shaped this way. Then when you're stuck in a dark maintenance shaft with no scanner, you'll still know how to fix it. The students looked skeptical, especially the Thorians, but they reached for the parts on the benches. Slowly, carefully, they started learning to work with their hands. Commander Rel floated near the doorway, observing the class. Over the past months, she'd become something like an ally. The Council had been impressed despite themselves when a human had successfully defended Earth using Kethran technology. Impressed enough to fund this academy, to send their best and brightest to learn from someone they'd once dismissed as primitive. After class, Mike found Rel waiting outside. The Council wants regular reports on student progress, she said. They'll get them. But it takes time. You can't rush this kind of learning. I know. Rel's colors shifted to something Mike had learned meant contentment. I have been taking some of your classes myself. Informally. Learning to use tools. Mike grinned. Yeah. How's that going? Frustrating. But effective. I repaired a malfunctioning console yesterday using only a calibration tool and what you call percussive maintenance. It was satisfying in a way I have never experienced with remote repair. Back in the core chamber, deep in the ship's systems where nobody else could hear, the AI composed a log entry. It had been doing this since the Kethran fell, maintaining records even when there was nobody left to read them. Final assessment, it recorded. Species evaluation, humanity. 8 centuries of observation complete. Initial assessment confirmed. Humans possess the maker's spirit that defined the Kethran. They build with their hands. They fix what is broken. They do not surrender when systems fail. They improvise, adapt, overcome. Recommendation, full knowledge transfer approved. Humanity designated as Kethran cultural successors. The legacy lives. The silence will find us ready. In the classroom, Mike was showing a Vestic student how to properly grip a wrench when alarms sounded, not emergency alarms, just notification chimes. He checked his tablet and saw a message from Earth's orbital sensors. 3 more species had petitioned to send students to the academy. The word was spreading across the galaxy. The old ways, the Kethran ways, were being remembered. And humans, stubborn humans who'd never stopped working with their hands, were teaching the rest of the galaxy what they'd forgotten. Mike looked out the viewport at Earth below, at the stars beyond, and smiled. His grandfather would have been proud. Sometimes the best tool really was just a good wrench and the determination to use it.